I left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a beat-up sedan." Lincoln roared with laughter, raising a crystal flute of vintage champagne. The entire ballroom cheered for the man who had supposedly pulled off the divorce of the century. He thought he had outsmarted his quiet, submissive wife. He thought her silence in the courtroom was defeat. He was wrong. Lincoln didn't know that the poor janitor father-in-law he had mocked for 5 years wasn't fixing pipes, he was buying the bank that held Lincoln's mortgage. The checkmate was coming, and it would cost Lincoln much more than alimony. The air inside the Sapphire Lounge smelled of expensive cologne, roasted duck, and the distinct metallic scent of unbridled arrogance. It was a Tuesday night in Manhattan, but for Lincoln Adams it was Independence Day. He stood at the head of a long mahogany table, the city skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him like a backdrop he had personally commissioned. Around him sat the sharks of the venture capital world, men and women who measured human worth in stock options and quarterly returns. But tonight, Lincoln was the apex predator. "To freedom," Lincoln announced, his voice booming. He gestured grandly with a glass of Dom Perignon. "And to the best damn lawyer in New York, who ensured that community property is just a suggestion, not a rule." A ripple of laughter went through the room. Beside him, Jessica, a 23-year-old model with legs that went on for days and an attention span that didn't giggled and draped herself over his shoulder. She was the prize he had been hiding for 6 months, the upgrade he felt he deserved after 5 years of what he called drudgery. "So," asked Brad, a junior partner at Lincoln's firm, leaning forward with a hungry look in his eyes. "She really took the deal, just like that." Lincoln smirked, loosening his silk tie. "Took it. She practically begged for it. I told you all Lauren is simple. She doesn't have the stomach for a fight. She sat there in mediation wearing that same grey cardigan she's had since we got married, looking at the floor. When my lawyer Henderson slid the papers across the table papers that gave her a flat sum of $50,000 and absolutely zero equity in Adams Tech she just signed. $50,000, Brad whistled. "Lincoln, your portfolio is worth $40 million. That's highway robbery." "That's business," Lincoln corrected, tapping his temple. "I told her the company was in debt. I told her the penthouse was leveraged to the hilt. She believes whatever I say because she doesn't know how the real world works. She thinks money comes from hard work, not leverage." He took a long sip of champagne, savoring the bubbles. The memory of the divorce proceedings earlier that afternoon was sweeter than the wine. Lauren had been so quiet. Throughout their marriage, Lauren had always been the quiet one. She was the woman who made sure his shirts were pressed, who cooked dinner even when he came home at 2:00 a.m., smelling of another woman's perfume, who tolerated his mother's snide comments about her humble origins. "She's going back to Ohio," Lincoln continued, addressing the table. "Back to that little coal dust town she crawled out of. And good riddance. I need a partner who fits the image of a CEO, not someone who looks like she should be organizing a bake sale." He squeezed Jessica's waist, and she beamed up at him. "Lincoln is going to take me to Paris next week," she chirped. "First class," Lincoln added, "on the company jet, because guess who retains full control of the aviation assets?" "You're a genius, Adams," another colleague shouted. Lincoln basked in the adulation. He felt invincible. He had successfully hidden 3 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, transferred the deed of the Hamptons estate to a shell corporation named Phoenix LLC, a month before filing, and manipulated the stock valuation of his company, to look like it was tanking only to plan a miraculous recovery next quarter. He had committed perjury fraud and emotional abuse, and he had gotten away with it all because Lauren was too stupid to check the books. What about her family? Someone asked. Didn't she have a dad? Some blue-collar guy? Didn't he want to fight for her? Lincoln laughed so hard he nearly choked on his drink. He had to set his glass down, wiping a tear from his eye. Oh God, the father. Arthur, Lincoln wheezed. Old Artie. You guys wouldn't believe this guy. I met him maybe 3 times. He drives a rusted-out Ford pickup truck from the 90s. Always has grease under his fingernails. He came to the wedding wearing a suit that looked like he rented it from a funeral home in 1985. The man is a janitor or a mechanic, I don't even know. He barely speaks. Lincoln shook his head, his expression turning mocking. Lauren said he wanted to come to the mediation today for moral support. I told the security guard at the firm that if he saw an old man in flannel looking for the bathroom to point him toward the subway. The table erupted again. They loved it. They loved the cruelty because it made them feel powerful. I actually did her a favor, Lincoln said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. If she had fought me, I would have crushed her. I would have buried her in legal fees until she was living in a shelter. Taking the 50 grand was the smartest thing she ever did. She knows her place. At that moment, Lincoln's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it. It was a text from Lauren. The movers are finished. The keys are under the mat. Goodbye, Lincoln. He smirked and turned the phone screen toward Jessica. See broken, defeated, gone. He typed a reply. Don't forget to cancel the milk delivery. I don't drink 2%. Enjoy your life in the trailer park. He hit send and threw the phone back onto the table. DJ! He shouted toward the booth at the end of the room. Turn it up. Tonight we celebrate the shedding of dead weight. As the bass dropped and the champagne flowed, Lincoln Adams felt like the king of the world. He had no idea that the phone he had just tossed onto the table was effectively a ticking time bomb. He had no idea that the dead weight he had just shed was the only thing that had been keeping him afloat. And he certainly had no idea that Arthur Hart, the man with grease under his fingernails, was currently sitting in a private study 3 blocks away, looking at a live video feed of Lincoln's party. His hand hovering over a telephone that connected directly to the governor of New York. To understand the magnitude of Lincoln's mistake, one had to understand the history of the marriage. It was a history written entirely in Lincoln's handwriting, or so he believed. They had met 5 years ago at a charity gala. Lincoln was there to schmooze investors. Lauren was there catering. She was handing out hors d'oeuvres wearing the standard black and white uniform of the service staff. Lincoln had been struck by her beauty, a subtle classic elegance that stood out amidst the plastic surgery and heavy makeup of the socialites in the room. He had approached her with the confidence of a man who had never been told no. He charmed her. He took her out. He played the role of the knight in shining armor, rescuing the poor girl from a life of servitude. When he proposed 6 months later, it wasn't out of deep soul-bonding love. It was because she checked the boxes. She was beautiful. She was quiet. She was grateful. And most importantly, she had no connections. A wife with no connections was a wife who couldn't leave him, couldn't challenge him, and couldn't take half his empire if things went south. Lincoln remembered the first time he met her parents. It was a mandatory trip to Ohio. He had dreaded it for weeks. They lived in a small, unassuming ranch-style house at the end of a long gravel driveway. The grass was overgrown. There was an old tractor sitting in the side yard. Arthur Hart had been working on the engine of an old Ford when Lincoln pulled up in his rented BMW. Arthur wiped his hands on a rag, leaving dark streaks of oil on the cloth, and extended a hand. "You must be Lincoln," Arthur had said. His voice was gravelly low and slow. Lincoln had hesitated before shaking the hand, worried about the grime. "That's right. And you're Artie—" "Arthur," the old man corrected gently. "But folks call me Artie." The dinner that followed was excruciating for Lincoln. They ate pot roast on chipped plates. The furniture was old, solid wood, but dated. There was no talk of the market, no discussion of politics or real estate. Arthur talked about the weather, the soil, and how his tomatoes were coming in late this year. Lincoln had spent the entire weekend making subtle digs. "So, Artie, have you ever considered investing? I could set you up with a starter portfolio. Maybe help you fix up this place." Arthur had just smiled a small, sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We have enough, Lincoln. We don't need much." "Ambition is healthy, Arthur." Lincoln had lectured him, sipping instant coffee from a mug that said "World's okayest golfer." "Lauren tells me you retired early. What did you do? Factory work?" "I worked in logistics," Arthur said vaguely. "Moved things from point A to point B." "Truck driver," Lincoln concluded internally. He was a truck driver. For 5 years, that was the narrative. Lauren was the daughter of a truck driver and a housewife. She was lucky to be Mrs. Lincoln Adams. Lincoln used this leverage constantly. When Lauren wanted to go back to school to finish her art history degree, Lincoln shut it down. "Lauren, sweetie," he would say, patting her head. "Why waste money? You have me. Besides, you're not really academic, are you? It's not in your genetics. Your father is a lovely man, but he's not exactly a scholar. Let's stick to what you're good at. Hosting dinners for my clients." And she would nod, look down and say, "You're right, Lincoln." He mistook her patience for stupidity. He mistook her silence for agreement. But the cracks had started to show 6 months ago. Lincoln's company, Adams Tech, was facing a regulatory audit. He had been cutting corners, ignoring safety protocols to maximize profit on a new software rollout. He was stressed, angry, and drinking heavily. One night he came home to find Lauren sitting in his home office, reading a document he had left on the desk. It was a subpoena. "What are you doing?" he had snapped, snatching the paper from her. "Lincoln, this looks serious," she had said, her voice trembling slightly. "It says you misappropriated funds from the pension scheme." "It's a clerical error," he shouted, looming over her. "Don't read things you don't understand. Lauren, stick to the kitchen. This is big boy stuff." "My father always said that pension funds are sacred," she whispered. "You don't touch the workers' money." "Your father," Lincoln laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Your father worries about whether he has enough gas money to get to the grocery store. Do not quote that peasant to me in my own house." That was the moment. Lincoln didn't know it, but that was the moment the switch flipped. Lauren didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just looked at him with a strange, unreadable expression. It was a look of assessment, like an appraiser looking at a piece of jewelry and realizing it was fake. "Okay, Lincoln," she had said. "I won't bring him up again." The next week, she filed for divorce. Lincoln was delighted. He assumed she would hire a strip mall lawyer. Instead, she represented herself in the preliminary hearings, then hired a quiet man named Mr. Henderson for the final mediation. Henderson looked like a high school librarian, frayed suit-thick glasses, nervous stutter. Lincoln's shark of a lawyer, Montgomery, had eaten Henderson alive. Or so it seemed. Back in the Sapphire Lounge, the party was winding down. It was 2:00 a.m. Lincoln was stumbling toward the elevator, Jessica clinging to his arm. "Let's go to the penthouse," he slurred. "I want to see the view now that it's all mine." He pulled out his phone again to call for his driver. He had 3 missed calls, all from his chief financial officer, Dave. "Why is Dave calling me at 2 a.m.? Lincoln grumbled, hitting the callback button. "Buzzkill." Dave answered on the first ring. The background noise was chaotic, shouting phones ringing. "Lincoln." "Where are you?" Dave's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysterical. "I'm celebrating my freedom, Dave. What is it?" The server crashed again. "Lincoln, listen to me," Dave said. "You need to log into the corporate accounts, right now. It can wait until morning." "It cannot wait," Dave screamed. "Lincoln, the credit line. The bank just pulled it." Lincoln stopped walking. The alcohol in his system seemed to evaporate instantly. Which bank?" "First National, our primary lender. They triggered the immediate repayment clause. They're calling in the $40 million loan for the expansion. They say we're in breach of contract due to ethical misconduct and management instability." "That's impossible," Lincoln hissed, stepping away from Jessica. "I have a golf date with the VP of First National next week. We're tight." "The VP was fired this morning, Lincoln. There's new ownership. A holding company bought out the controlling stake of the bank's regional division yesterday afternoon. They're scrubbing the books." "Who?" Lincoln demanded. "Who bought the bank?" "I don't know, some shell company called AH Logistics," Dave stammered. "But that's not all. The audit. The one we thought we buried, the SEC, just announced a formal investigation an hour ago. They have documents, Lincoln. They have the internal emails you sent me about the pension funds." Lincoln felt the room spin. "How those were on the encrypted server. Only you and I had access." "I didn't leak them," Dave cried. "I swear, but someone got in, or someone gave them the key." Lincoln hung up. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. AH Logistics. The name sounded vaguely familiar, boringly generic. He looked at Jessica, who was checking her makeup in the reflection of the elevator doors. "Is everything okay, baby?" she asked, pouting. "Fine." Lincoln lied, his voice tight. "Just a glitch. Let's go home." He needed to get to his computer. He needed to move the hidden money from the Caymans before the freeze hit. He had $3 million stashed in the Phoenix LLC account. It was his escape hatch. They took the town car to the penthouse. Lincoln left Jessica in the foyer and sprinted to his office. He booted up his computer, his fingers trembling as he typed in the passcode for his offshore banking portal. "Access denied." He typed it again. "Access denied. Account frozen by court order." "No," he whispered. "No, no, no. That's not possible. No one knows about this account. Lauren doesn't even know where the Cayman Islands are." His phone rang again. It wasn't Dave this time. It was a blocked number. Lincoln answered it slowly. "Who is this?" "Hello, Lincoln." The voice was deep, gravelly, and slow. It was a voice he hadn't heard in years, usually muffled by the sound of a tractor engine or a wrench turning. "Arthur," Lincoln asked, confusion warring with panic. "Why are you calling me?" "I just wanted to congratulate you on the divorce," Arthur said. The tone wasn't angry. It was terrifyingly calm. "Lauren tells me you bragged about leaving her with a beat-up sedan." "Look, Artie, I don't have time for your redneck guilt trips," Lincoln snapped, trying to regain control. I'm dealing with a business crisis. I know, Arthur said. I'm the crisis. Lincoln froze. What? You asked me once what I did before I retired. Arthur continued. I told you I worked in logistics. I moved things from point A to point B. That was true. But I didn't drive the trucks, Lincoln. I owned the fleet, and the shipping lines, and the distribution centers. Lincoln's mouth went dry. I built Hartford Global from the ground up, Arthur said. We specialize in acquiring distressed assets and cleaning up corporate filth. And Lincoln, you are filthy. You're lying, Lincoln stammered. You live in a shack. You wear flannel. I live simply because I know the value of $1, Arthur replied. Unlike you who spends money you stole from your employees. That $40 million loan you owe, I bought the debt. The emails about the pension fund, Lauren didn't understand them at the time, but she has a photographic memory. She remembered the file names. My forensic accountants did the rest. You can't do this, Lincoln screamed. I have lawyers. I have Montgomery. Montgomery works for a firm that leases its office space from a real estate trust I control, Arthur said. He'll drop you by morning. Oh, and Lincoln, that ironclad divorce agreement. Lincoln looked at the papers on his desk. You rushed it, Arthur said. You were so eager to brag about giving her $50,000 that you didn't read the addendum on page 40, section C, the one regarding undisclosed assets discovered post-settlement. Lincoln frantically flipped the pages of the divorce decree he had celebrated hours ago. He found page 40, clause 12. C. In the event that one party is found to have willfully concealed assets exceeding $100,000 in value, the concealing party forfeits 100% of all marital assets, including business equity real estate and liquid cash to the injured party as punitive damages. You hid the Cayman money, Arthur said softly. We found it, which means, legally speaking, you just signed everything you own over to Lauren. The penthouse you're standing in. It's hers. The company hers. The jet you promised that girl. Lincoln could hear the smile in Arthur's voice. Lauren is taking the cat to Paris. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. The dial tone echoed in Lincoln's ear, a harsh buzzing sound that seemed to mock the absolute silence of the penthouse. He slowly lowered the phone, his hand trembling so violently he nearly dropped it. Clause 12, C. The words burned in his mind like a brand. Lincoln. Jessica's voice came from the doorway. She was holding a bottle of water, looking annoyed. Who was that? You look like you've seen a ghost. And why is my Amex declining on the Sephora app? I'm trying to order that serum. Lincoln looked up at her. For the first time, he didn't see a trophy or a prize. He saw a liability, a bill he could no longer pay. Pack your bags, Lincoln whispered, his voice hoarse. What, we're going to Paris tonight? She squealed, clapping her hands. I haven't even picked out my outfits. No! Lincoln roared, the panic finally erupting into rage. He slammed his fist onto the mahogany desk, cracking the glass surface. Get out! Get your things and get out of my apartment. Jessica recoiled, her eyes wide. Excuse me, you can't talk to me like that. I'm the future Mrs. Adams. There is no Adams, Lincoln screamed, pacing the room like a caged animal. The accounts are frozen, Jessica. The bank is calling the loan. It's all gone. Do you understand English? I have $0. Now get out before I throw you out. Jessica stared at him for a long, calculating second. The vacuous look vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She looked at his shaking hands, the sweat beading on his forehead, the terror in his eyes. She didn't ask if he was okay. She didn't offer comfort. She simply reached into her purse, pulled out the diamond tennis bracelet he had given her for their 1-month anniversary, and clasped it tightly around her wrist. "Well," she said, her voice icy, "that's disappointing. I guess I'll call an Uber. Don't expect me to delete the photos of us, though. I can probably sell the story to the Tatler for $5,000. The Rise and Fall of a Wall Street Fraud. Catchy title, right?" "You too." Lincoln lunged, but the intercom on his desk buzzed loudly, cutting him off. "Mr. Adams!" It was the doorman, usually obsequious, now sounding stern. "There are some gentlemen here to see you. They have paperwork." "Tell them to go to hell," Lincoln shouted at the speaker. "I'm afraid we can't do that, sir," the doorman replied. "They are accompanied by the NYPD. They are coming up now." Lincoln collapsed into his leather chair. The elevator chimed 3 times, the code for the penthouse. The doors slid open. 3 men in dark suits stepped out, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. Leading them was a woman Lincoln recognized vaguely. She was a junior associate at Hartford Global. He remembered seeing her in the background of a press release once. She held a clipboard with an air of absolute authority. "Lincoln Adams?" she asked, though she clearly knew who he was. "This is trespassing." Lincoln spat, though he didn't stand up. "I'll sue you for every penny you have." "I'm Ms. Davies, representing the new owner of this property, Mrs. Lauren Hart Adams," the woman said calmly. "This is an emergency eviction order granted by Judge Halloway due to probable cause of asset destruction and flight risk. You have 30 minutes to vacate the premises. You may take clothing and personal toiletries only. All electronics, jewelry, art, and furniture are now frozen assets pending the forensic audit." "This is my house," Lincoln shrieked. "I bought it. With money leveraged against a company you no longer control," Ms. Davies corrected. "And technically under the divorce decree you signed today, ownership transferred automatically upon the discovery of the Cayman fraud. Clause 12C is very efficient, Mr. Adams." She motioned to the police officers. "Officer, please ensure Mr. Adams does not damage any property while he packs. My team will inventory the items." Lincoln watched paralyzed as Jessica walked past the police officers, dragging her Louis Vuitton suitcase. She stopped in front of Miss Davies. "I'm not with him," Jessica said quickly. "I was just leaving. He tricked me too." Miss Davies gave her a pitying look. "Go ahead. But if you're wearing any jewelry purchased on the company credit card in the last 90 days, I suggest you leave it on the table. We will be pursuing recipients of stolen funds." Jessica froze. Slowly, grudgingly, she unclasped the tennis bracelet and dropped it onto the hallway table with a clatter. She glared at Lincoln, muttered a curse word, and stormed into the elevator. Lincoln was left alone with the wolves. He stumbled into his bedroom, grabbing a duffel bag. He threw in suits, shirts, whatever he could grab. He reached for his collection of watches, Rolex, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet. "Ah," an officer said, stepping forward and blocking his hand. "Those are assets, sir. Leave them." "They're mine," Lincoln cried, tears of frustration pricking his eyes. "I bought the Daytona with my bonus, the bonus that is currently under investigation by the SEC," the officer asked dryly. "Leave it." 30 minutes later, Lincoln Adams stood on the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. It was 3:30 a.m. He had a duffel bag of clothes and his wallet, which contained 3 credit cards that he knew were already cancelled. He looked up at the penthouse. The lights were blazing. He could see figures moving around auditors, counting his things. He looked around for his car. His Aston Martin was usually parked right in front. It was gone. "Where is my car?" he shouted at the valet who was standing a few feet away, avoiding eye contact. "Jerry! Where is the Aston?" "Repossessed, Mr. Adams," Jerry said quietly, looking at his shoes. "Tow truck came 10 minutes ago. Bank order." "So how am I supposed to leave?" Lincoln demanded, hysteria rising in his throat. Jerry pointed to the corner of the block. Parked under a flickering street lamp was a 2008 Honda Civic with a dented bumper and peeling grey paint. It was the car Lincoln had bought for Lauren when they first got married, telling her it was sensible and safe while he drove a Porsche. "Miss Davies left the keys with me," Jerry said, handing over a single worn car key. "She said, and I quote, 'He bragged about leaving me with a beat-up sedan. It seems only fair he gets to keep it.'" Lincoln stared at the key. It felt heavy in his hand. Cold. He walked over to the Honda. The interior smelled of old vanilla air freshener and neglect. He threw his duffel bag into the passenger seat and sat behind the wheel. The engine sputtered before turning over with a whining protest. Lincoln, Adams, the king of New York, pulled away from the curb, merging into the traffic of garbage trucks and delivery vans, invisible and irrelevant. Sleep was impossible. Lincoln drove aimlessly until sunrise, parking the Honda in a Walmart lot in New Jersey, to close his eyes for an hour. When he woke up, his neck was stiff, and his mouth tasted like stale champagne and regret. But the daylight brought a surge of his old arrogance. This had to be a nightmare, a misunderstanding. He just needed to get to the office. Once he was in the Adams Tech building, he could fix this. He could talk to the board. He could charm his way out. He always did. He drove back into the city, hitting the morning rush hour. The Honda's AC was broken, and he sweated through his wrinkled dress shirt. He pulled up to the glass and steel skyscraper that housed Adams Tech. He tried to pull into the executive garage, but his badge didn't trigger the gate. "Hey," he yelled out the window at the attendant booth. "Open the gate, it's Adams!" The attendant, a new guy Lincoln didn't recognize, shook his head. "ID invalid. Please clear the lane." "I am the CEO," Lincoln screamed, honking the pathetic horn of the Honda. "Sir!" "Clear the lane, or I'm calling the police," the attendant said, bored. Lincoln reversed, scraping the Honda's bumper on a concrete pillar, and parked illegally on the street. He stormed into the lobby. The moment he entered, the atmosphere shifted. The lobby was usually a bustling hive of activity. Today, it was silent. People stopped walking. Conversations died. Dozens of eyes turned to him. They weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him with morbid curiosity, like he was a car crash. He marched toward the elevators, but 2 massive security guards stepped in his path. "Mr. Adams," one of them said, "you are not permitted in the building." "This is my company," Lincoln shouted. "I built this—" "Actually," a voice called out from the mezzanine. Lincoln looked up. Standing on the balcony was Dave, his CFO. But Dave wasn't alone. Standing next to him was a tall, severe-looking man in a grey suit and... Arthur. Arthur Hart. The janitor. The mechanic. Arthur was wearing a suit. But it wasn't the funeral home suit from the wedding. It was a charcoal 3-piece that fit him perfectly. He wore it with an ease that Lincoln, even with his millions, had never quite mastered. It was the ease of a man who didn't need the suit to prove he was powerful. Arthur leaned on the railing, looking down at Lincoln in the lobby. "Arthur," Lincoln yelled, "tell these gorillas to let me in." "We need to talk. We're done talking, Lincoln." Arthur's voice carried through the silent lobby without him raising it. The board met at 6:00 a.m. You've been voted out, unanimously, for cause. You can't do that. I have the majority shares. The SEC froze your shares at 7:00 a.m., the man in the grey suit next to Dave said. I'm Agent Miller, FBI. We're currently executing a search warrant on your office and server room. We found the second set of books, Lincoln, the ones you kept on the external drive. Very sloppy. Lincoln felt the blood drain from his face. Dave, tell them. Dave looked down, his face pale. I cut a deal, Lincoln. I gave them everything, the emails, the Cayman transfers, the falsified safety reports on the software, everything. Traitor, Lincoln screamed. I made you. You made me a felon, Dave shouted back, his voice cracking. I'm not going to jail for your greed. Arthur spoke again. Go home, Lincoln. Oh, wait. You don't have one. Go somewhere else. You planned this, Lincoln hissed, pointing a shaking finger up at the balcony. You played the dumb old man. I never said I was dumb, Arthur replied calmly. You assumed it, because I work with my hands. Because I don't use big words to hide small lies. I told you, Lincoln. I move things from point A to point B. I just moved you from the penthouse to the pavement. Arthur turned and walked away, disappearing into the offices. Agent Miller followed him. Lincoln stood there shaking. Someone in the lobby snickered, then someone else. He turned to see his former employees. People he had bullied, underpaid, and ignored taking photos of him with their phones. He turned and ran. He ran out of the building past the illegal parking spot where a ticket was already flapping on the Honda's windshield and dove into the car. He needed a lawyer, a real one. He dialed Montgomery's number. Montgomery was the shark of sharks. He would know what to do. Montgomery and Associates, a receptionist answered. Get me Montgomery, now. It's Lincoln Adams. There was a pause, then a click, then Montgomery's voice. But it wasn't the warm, oily tone he used when they were drinking scotch. It was cold. Lincoln, I was wondering when you'd call. You have to stop this, Monty. They kicked me out. The FBI is there. You need to file an injunction. Sue Arthur Hart. Sue the bank. I can't do that, Lincoln. Why not I pay you a retainer of $20,000 a month? Your retainer check bounced this morning, Montgomery said. And besides, there's a conflict of interest. What conflict? My firm represents Hartford Global in their acquisition matters, Montgomery said smoothly. Mr. Hart has been a client of this firm for 30 years. In fact, he's a senior partner's golf buddy. Did you never ask who recommended me to you? Lincoln? Lincoln stopped breathing. You were his lawyer the whole time. I was a lawyer, Montgomery corrected. I represented you to the best of my ability. But I can't help it if my client commits fraud. I have a duty to the court. I've already handed over my files to the district attorney. Attorney-client privilege doesn't cover ongoing criminal conspiracies, Lincoln. Good luck. The line went dead. Lincoln dropped the phone into his lap. He sat in the sweltering car traffic horns blaring around him. He had no money, no home, no lawyer, no friends. He realized he was hungry. He hadn't eaten since the party. He checked his wallet. He had $40 in cash. He drove to a diner on the outskirts of the city, a place he would never have been caught dead in a week ago. He ordered coffee and toast. While he ate, he looked up at the TV mounted in the corner. It was tuned to CNBC. The headline banner screamed in Red Adams' Crash Tech, darling exposed in massive fraud scheme. They were showing footage of him from the Sapphire Lounge party, laughing and holding the champagne. Then they cut to a split screen of the FBI, carrying boxes out of his office. The anchor was speaking. Sources say the whistleblower was Adams's own father-in-law, industrial tycoon, Arthur Hart, who had maintained a low profile for decades before stepping in to save the company's employees from pension collapse. Hart has pledged to make all employees whole out of his own pocket. Meanwhile, Lincoln Adams's whereabouts are unknown. Lincoln lowered his head, hiding his face behind his hands. The waitress dropped the check on the table. "You look like that guy on TV," she said, suspiciously chewing gum. "I have a common face," Lincoln mumbled, throwing a $20 bill on the table and rushing out. He had one chord left to play, one desperate, insane card. He had to see Lauren. She was the weak link. She was soft. She had loved him once. If he could just get her alone away from her father, he could manipulate her. He could cry, beg, promise to change. She would take him back. She had to. He knew she had gone home to Ohio, to the shack. He got into the Honda, checked the gas gauge half a tank, and merged onto the highway heading west. It was an 8-hour drive. He would drive straight through. He would show up on her doorstep, broken and humble. It would work. It was the only thing that could work. The drive was a blur of anger and exhaustion. Lincoln fueled his rage with every mile. He replayed the marriage in his head, twisting the memories to make himself the victim. She deceived me, he thought. She pretended to be poor. That's the real fraud. I'm the victim here. By the time he reached the small town of Oak Creek, Ohio, it was late afternoon. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the cornfields. He remembered the way to the house. Turn left at the general store, go 3 miles down the dirt road, look for the rusted mailbox. He found it. The gravel driveway was just as he remembered. The small ranch-style house sat at the end, looking modest and weathered. The old tractor was still there. Lincoln pulled the Honda up to the porch, kicking up a cloud of dust. He smoothed his wrinkled suit, ran a hand through his greasy hair, and practiced his repentant husband face in the rearview mirror. He stepped out and stomped up the wooden steps. He banged on the door. Lauren, please, we need to talk." No answer. He tried the knob, locked. He peered through the window. The house was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no curtains, just bare floors. "Looking for someone." Lincoln spun around. An old man in overalls was standing near the tractor holding a rake. It wasn't Arthur. It was a stranger. "Where are they?" Lincoln demanded. "The Harts. Where did they go?" The old man spat on the ground. "They didn't go nowhere. Who are you?" "I'm family," Lincoln snapped. "I need to see Arthur or Lauren." The man squinted at him. "You must be the ex-husband, the city slicker." He chuckled. "Artie said you might come sniffing around." "Where are they?" "They don't live here, son," the man said, leaning on his rake. "This is the caretaker's cottage, my house. Artie just used the front porch to meet you that one time because he didn't want you getting ideas. Said you had sticky fingers." Lincoln stared at the cottage. "Caretaker's cottage?" "Then where?" The man pointed a calloused finger toward a dense line of oak trees behind the cottage. "Take the service road back there. About a mile. Can't miss it." Lincoln ran back to the Honda. He gunned the engine and drove around the cottage, finding a paved, narrow road hidden behind a row of hedges. He drove through the tunnel of trees, the canopy thick and dark. After a mile, the trees opened up. Lincoln slammed on the brakes. In front of him, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, was not a house. It was a manor, a sprawling Georgian-style estate made of red brick and white stone. It looked like something out of a period drama. There were stables to the left, with thoroughbred horses grazing in white-fenced paddocks. To the right, a massive greenhouse and what looked like a vineyard. In the circular driveway, which was paved with cobblestones, sat a fleet of cars, a vintage Jaguar, a Range Rover, and a pristine 1960s Ford pickup truck, the one Arthur drove, but clearly a collector's item, not a junker. And standing on the front steps laughing was Lauren. She looked different. The grey cardigan was gone. She was wearing a tailored white sundress that looked like it cost more than Lincoln's first car. Her hair was loose and wavy. She held a glass of white wine. Standing next to her was a man. He was tall, athletic, with kind eyes and a rugged jawline. He had his arm around her waist. Lincoln felt a bile of jealousy and shock rise in his throat. He threw the car door open and stumbled onto the driveway. "Lauren!" he screamed, his voice cracking. The laughter stopped. Lauren looked down the steps. She didn't look scared. She didn't look submissive. She looked annoyed. "Lincoln," she said, her voice cool and steady. "I see you found the main house. I told Dad you wouldn't be smart enough to figure it out, but he bet $5 you'd show up eventually." Arthur stepped out of the front door. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, but he held himself like a king surveying his domain. "I win the bet," Arthur said, taking a sip of his beer. "What is this?" Lincoln gestured wildly at the mansion. You lied to me for 5 years. You pretended to be nobodies." "We didn't pretend to be nobodies," Lauren said, walking down one step. "We pretended to be ordinary. There's a difference. We wanted to see if you loved me, or if you were just sniffing for money. You made your priorities very clear, very quickly." "I am your husband," Lincoln shouted, walking toward them. "You can't just discard me. I want half of all of this. We were married." "Prenuptial agreement," Arthur called out. "We didn't sign one," Lincoln yelled. "I refused. I wanted my assets protected." "Correct," Arthur said. "You refused a prenup to protect your assets, but the trust that holds this estate. It was established when Lauren was born. It's irrevocable. It's not marital property. You could have been married for 50 years. Lincoln, and you wouldn't have touched a brick of this house. It belongs to the Hart family, and you are no longer family." Lincoln stopped at the bottom of the stairs. He looked at the man standing next to Lauren. "Who is this?" Lincoln sneered. "The gardener." The man smiled, extending a hand. "Dr. Julian Thorne, neurosurgeon, and Lauren's fiancé." "Fiancé?" Lincoln laughed hysterically. "We've been divorced for 24 hours. Julian and I grew up together," Lauren said softly, looking at the doctor with a warmth she had never shown Lincoln. "We were high school sweethearts. We reconnected 6 months ago, when I started investigating your fraud. He helped me decode the medical insurance scams you were running on your employees." "You were cheating on me," Lincoln accused. "I was gathering evidence," Lauren corrected. "And unlike you, I have integrity. Nothing happened until the papers were signed yesterday." "Lauren, please." Lincoln dropped to his knees on the cobblestones. The fight drained out of him. The reality of the mansion, the doctor, the billions he had missed out on it, crushed him. "I have nothing. They took the penthouse. They took the company. I'm driving the Honda. Please, just help me. Give me $1 million. Just $1 million to start over. It's pocket change to you." Lauren looked down at him. Her eyes were sad, but not for the reason he hoped. She was sad that she had ever wasted time on him. "You have the Honda," Lauren said. "It's a good car, Lincoln. Reliable. If you take care of it, it will last you a long time." "Lauren, get off my property, Lincoln," Arthur said, his voice dropping to that dangerous low growl. "Before I release the hounds. And yes, unlike the Burns in The Simpsons, I actually have hounds." A deep barking had echoed from the stables. Lincoln scrambled to his feet. He looked at Lauren one last time. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She had turned back to Julian, who was whispering something in her ear that made her smile. Lincoln turned and ran to the Honda. He reversed out of the driveway, tires spinning on the expensive cobblestones, and sped back toward the dark tunnel of trees. He had lost the past. He had lost the future. And as he drove back onto the main road, blue and red lights flashed in his rearview mirror. The sheriff's department. Lincoln pulled over. He slumped against the steering wheel. A deputy tapped on the window. "License and registration, please." Lincoln handed them over. "Mr. Adams," the deputy asked. "Yes?" "Step out of the vehicle, please. We have a warrant for your arrest issued by the FBI. Wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." Lincoln laughed, a broken wheezing sound. He opened the door and stepped out. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked back toward the line of trees, hiding the castle he had been too arrogant to see. "He bragged about winning," Lincoln whispered to himself as they shoved him into the back of the squad car. He bragged. The county jail holding cell reeked of bleach and sweat. For 3 days, Lincoln sat on a metal bench, waiting for a savior who never came. Instead, he got Harold a court-appointed public defender with coffee stains on his tie and a briefcase full of bad news. "Here's the reality, Mr. Adams," Harold said, not bothering to sit. "The FBI has the IP addresses. They have the emails authorizing the pension theft and the Cayman transfers. You're dead to rights." "I was framed." Lincoln gripped the table. "Arthur Hart did this. He bribed them." Harold sighed. "Mr. Hart didn't bribe the FBI to find emails sent from your personal laptop, Lincoln. The prosecutor is offering 10 years if you plead out today." 10 years? Lincoln gasped. "I'm a CEO. I can't go to prison." Driven by the same arrogance that destroyed his marriage, Lincoln refused the deal. He insisted on a trial, convinced he could charm a jury into seeing his creative accounting as genius rather than theft. He was wrong. The trial was a media circus. The courtroom was packed with former employees who had lost their life savings. But the person Lincoln scanned the crowd for every day was Lauren. She only appeared on the day Arthur took the stand. Arthur sat in the witness box, looking uncomfortable but steady. When the prosecutor asked why he had purchased Adams Tech's debt, Arthur's voice was calm and gravelly. "I didn't do it for revenge," Arthur told the jury. "I did it because 400 families relied on those paychecks. Lincoln viewed his employees as overhead. I view them as people." Lincoln's defense crumbled against Arthur's quiet integrity, but the final nail in the coffin was the security footage from the Sapphire Lounge. The jury watched in silence as the video played on the large screens. "I left her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a beat-up sedan." On screen. Lincoln roared with laughter, raising his champagne. "She believes whatever I say, because she doesn't know how the real world works." In the defendant's chair, Lincoln shrank. Seeing himself bloated with pride, cruel and foolish, was worse than the cell. The jurors looked at him with unmasked disgust. He realized then that he wasn't the hero of a tragedy. He was the villain of a farce. The The verdict took less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Judge Halloway, a man known for his distaste for white-collar crime, didn't mince words during sentencing. Mr. Adams, you had every advantage: education, wealth, and a loyal family. You squandered it all for greed. You are sentenced to 15 years in federal prison with restitution set at $42 million. The gavel banged like a gunshot. As the marshals pulled Lincoln's arms behind his back, he frantically scanned the gallery. Arthur and Lauren stood up to leave. "Lauren!" Lincoln screamed, the handcuffs clicking tight. "Lauren, please, I'm sorry." Lauren paused. She turned, looking at him, not with anger, but with the hollow indifference one gives a stranger. She didn't speak. She simply turned her back, took Dr. Thorne's hand, and walked out of the heavy wooden doors, leaving Lincoln alone with the consequences of his own making. 12 years later. The city bus hissed to a halt, the air inside smelling of stale diesel and despair. Lincoln Adams stepped onto the pavement. He was 45, but he looked 60. His hair was thin and grey, his skin weathered by a decade in the prison laundry and 2 years on a landscaping crew. He wore a cheap windbreaker and a GPS ankle monitor. He had $60 to his name and a parole officer who would send him back to a cell if he didn't secure employment by Friday. Lincoln checked the crumpled address slip from the temp agency. He looked up at the building looming above him and froze. It was his old headquarters. But the sign no longer said Adams Tech. It read Hartford Tower. The conglomerate had swallowed his former empire years ago. He considered turning around, running away from the ghosts of his past life. But desperation anchored his feet. He needed the money. He entered through the service dock, heads down. The interview with the facilities manager, Rick, was brutal in its brevity. "Night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., Rick said, barely looking at Lincoln's application. "You mop the lobby, clean the executive bathrooms, and take out the trash. Don't talk to the tenants. Don't look at the tenants. Just clean. Can you do that?" "Yes," Lincoln rasped. "I can do that. You start tonight." Lincoln spent the first few hours in a daze. He pushed a heavy yellow bucket across the same marble floors he used to stride across in Italian leather. Now he was the invisible man, ensuring it shined for others. Around 2:00 a.m., he took the service elevator to the executive suite. It was quiet. The air smelled of money and lemon polish. He pushed his cart into the main boardroom to empty the bins. He stopped dead. On the far wall hung a massive oil-painted portrait. Arthur Hart sat in a leather chair, looking dignified and strong. Standing behind him, hand on his shoulder, was Lauren. She looked radiant, powerful, and happy. Beside her stood Dr. Julian Thorne. Below the painting was a brass plaque in honor of Arthur Hart, 1950 to 2035. Founder, visionary, father. Arthur was dead. Lincoln hadn't known. He stared at the image of the man he had once mocked as a peasant. Arthur had built a legacy that touched the sky. Lincoln had built nothing but a rap sheet. He was a good man. Lincoln spun around, nearly knocking over his cart. Lauren stood in the doorway. She wore a trench coat and held a briefcase, evidently working late. She looked at him at the grey uniform, the mop, the weary lines of defeat on his face. "Lauren," Lincoln whispered, terrified. I didn't know you were here. I just got the job. I'll leave." Lauren walked calmly into the room, her eyes scanning him without a hint of anger. There was only a cool, crushing indifference. "No need," she said softly. "We have a lot of cleaners. As long as you do your job, I don't care who pushes the mop." The words cut deeper than any scream. To her, he wasn't a villain anymore. He was just background noise. "I saw the plaque," Lincoln said, gesturing to the wall. "I'm sorry about Arthur." "He passed peacefully," Lauren replied, looking up at her father's portrait. "He was surrounded by his grandchildren. He was very loved." Grandchildren. The word echoed in the empty room, highlighting everything Lincoln had lost. "I see you kept the company," Lincoln managed to say. "I expanded it," Lauren corrected. "We restored the pensions you stole, Lincoln. With interest. It took 5 years, but we made every family whole." She turned to face him fully. "Dad used to say something about you, even after everything." "That I was a scumbag," Lincoln guessed bitterly. "No," Lauren said. "He said Lincoln is a man who thinks the world owes him a living. He'll never understand that the only things you truly own are the things you build with your own hands." She looked down at the mop handle in Lincoln's grip. "Looks like you're finally building something, Lincoln. Even if it's just a clean floor." She checked her watch. "My husband is waiting downstairs. Good night." She turned and walked out, the click of her heels fading down the hallway. She didn't look back. Lincoln stood alone in the silence. He looked at the painting of the king he had underestimated. He looked at the door where the queen he had discarded had left. He looked down at his bucket. The water was grey and murky. "Point A to point B," Lincoln whispered to himself, a ghost of Arthur's voice in his head. He dipped the mop into the water, wrung it out, and began to scrub. He put his back into it, sweating working. For the first time in his life, he wasn't scheming. He wasn't lying. He was just cleaning up the mess. Lincoln Adams thought he was playing chess, but he was just a pawn in a game of integrity he never bothered to learn. He measured worth in bank accounts while Arthur and Lauren measured it in loyalty. In the end, the poor father-in-law left a legacy that touched the sky, while the arrogant CEO was left scrubbing the floors of the empire he tried to steal. It's a brutal reminder when you climb the ladder by stepping on people you're only setting yourself up for a harder fall. Karma doesn't always shout. Sometimes it comes in the silence of a mop bucket at 2 a.m. If this story gave you chills, please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. Did Lincoln deserve a second chance? Let me know in the comments below.